Example, if I am talking for 20 minutes without actually enabling my my microphone, then you should probably tell me. Like you did, thank you. So I can actually. So what I was saying is, I hope that everything goes okay because actually, I like we are trying a new setup instead of using OBS. We are using instead of using StreamYard, which was what we were using before, we are using OBS. This means like a slightly more involved setup, which I actually never did before. Kinda like I never streamed on YouTube. So yeah, I know I was just muted. So yeah, I hope that everything goes okay. So if you see some hiccup, please write something in chat, just like that. And let's jump right into it. So today we will talk about the changelog, as usual. And then, it's basically an Halloween episode because we are actually going over the React documentation. Ooh. So, but I think like the direct documentation specifically, we will go over the you might not need an effect documentation, which was one of the groundwork of Dan Abramov, but it really shows basically why effect are an escape hatch. It was even more an escape hatch in React, but effect in general are an escape hatch, and you should be very aware of when to use them. So that's why we are going over this thing. But first, let's talk about Svelte because it's better. Let's see what the changelog is about. So we can start from 5.1.3. So we have some bug fix, rethrow errors from await block if no catch block exists. So obviously, when you write an await block in Svelte, under the hood, we are actually like try catching your code. And this bug was very simple because basically it was not rethrown the error, which should have been. So now, like we catch your error, but we are also rethrowing it. SVG element attribute have case preserved. Like this is one of the worst part about HTML in general, which like a different namespace like SVG can really fuck you up, and it's very it's very annoying. So ensure bind group work as intended with proxy state object. Ensure value is correct set to 0 on the progress element. Skip comment node is snippet validation logic. So if you have some comments inside the snippet, previously it was wrongfully validating it. Typo in action types. Remove metadata from legacy IST. So the IST is the abstract syntax tree that basically when we are converting from a string to a Svelte component, we use an IST, and we use an IST, and this means that like before there was some metadata left on the legacy IST. So and now it's not more. It's not anymore. I see no audio from the main character, but like question everything. I don't know if like is everybody not hearing me, or is just that he started late to watch the stream, and this is when I was muted. Let's go ahead in the meantime. Oh, sorry. Add empty stack to compile diagnostic to show error on build. There was this workaround, this compile diagnostic, because basically like when we are throwing some error, some like compiler error, some I don't know, compiler warning and stuff like that, we were throwing an error initially then we switched to not be an error. But this means that when some error happens during the compilation, during the build, you will get no error from Vite, which is kind of lame. You can see like in a future release, yeah, exactly. Make compiler error extend from error again. Like basically there are some tools like rollup or Vite and stuff like that that kind of requires you to like extend from error if you want to throw an error, because otherwise they will not use the thing as an error. So pretty annoying, but this was a simple fix of adding an empty stack to compile diagnostic to show the error again. But if you're not using Vite plugin Svelte, which is like changing your compile diagnostic error to throw it correctly, but just raw Vite or raw rollup, then you will not get the benefits. And so that's why we also have this. Ensure effect tracking correctly handles tracking reactions. So effect tracking, which is basically what you get if you do $tracking, $effect.tracking, was not returning the right value when tracking reaction. This is like a huge work about by Ben to update all the links, because now Svelte has a new website, the Omni site, and obviously in the documentation there were some like broken links. So Ben did a fantastic job to go and basically catch every instance of a broken link and fix it. More exhaustive check in SvelteMap set in Derived. So when you were doing SvelteMap.set, like there was a bug where since inside SvelteMap, Deriveds are created eagerly. So when you are listening for, like if you're trying to do SvelteMap.has something, then we create a derived for it, because like this is an optimization. But this meant that when setting, if like there was some situation where if someone was listening for the derived but not for the version of the map, like it's a bit complicated how it works under the hood, but like we had a bug that was fixed, and then it was not really fixed because we needed a more extensive check. Like we were initially checking just by like, is these two arrays is one of these two arrays not null, and instead we had to check that it was really like two different arrays. Trim white space while migrating blocks. So this is also something interesting, because if you are like in Svelte 4, and I can actually show you this, in Svelte 4, you could in theory write, like if I do if true, and I do cool, like we are in legacy mode, and in legacy mode I could have something like this. I mean, not with a dot, but I don't know why you would do it, but in theory you could have something like this, which is weird, to be fair. But if you are using runes, this is actually disallowed now. And to be fair, it makes sense, because like, why would you write code like this? But actually there was some person that was like preferred a syntax like this, for example. And so they reported the bug, but this was actually a conscious decision. So $sign state, like this is still an error. The problem was that the migration script was not migrating this thing. And so when you were passing from this to rune mode, and like to make this stateful, I actually need to change it click is equal name equal Paolo. Change. Otherwise it will not be state. So now when we are migrating to runes, we are actually punk. Oh, what is happening? Let me see. Maybe there was some. Let me try to refresh. Maybe there is a bug. As usual. So when we try to migrate, now we are removing the white space since it's not something that like you can do in Svelte 5. So it's nice. Update links that previously pointed to the preview website. Properly migrate import types prefixed with $sign. So this was just basically like, as you may know in Svelte 5, you can't prefix an import with $sign or a variable with $sign. Like there's literally an error. So normally when you are writing your code and Svelte is compiling it, the types are all removed from the picture. But if you add a type with $sign, starting with $sign, which could happen and is not like wrong, like you can have a type with $sign. When migrating, trying to compile your component, it was failing. So now it is fixed. So a lot of changes. Typo in compiler error messages. Preserve the separator between selector when an unused selector is in between. So this is about CSS. So basically, in dev, if I'm not mistaken, is only for dev. Like to show you, let's say that I have some unused CSS. So this is just for dev, I'm pretty sure. Let's say that I have, I don't know, div like this, color red. If you go to the CSS output, this is actually the CSS output. So we actually add this unused div like it's a comment. So in prod, it will actually be removed from the build. Otherwise, it will not be useful to like just comment it out. But this was like, it meant that if you had something like div h1, for example, and only h1 was unused, or something like that, I think is actually like h1 like dot my class. If you had something like this and only h1 was unused, like we would add unused only to this, and this was causing basically invalid CSS code in dev. And so now it's fixed. More robust resubscribe detection from store. So from store is a utility function that you can use to transform a store into state. So I think I'm lagging a bit, but let's see. Let's go ahead for the moment. From store, you can basically transform a store into state. So I want to be also very clear about this because I see these happen from time to time. Like you don't have to use these inside a Svelte component because you can just use $sign stuff. This is more for like if you want to use it inside a library. So inside the library, but also inside a JavaScript file. So I don't know, my store.js. Let's say that you have a store writable from svelte/store. Let's say that I have const store is equal writable. And let me actually export it. Export store is equal to 0, right? Now, basically, like if you are inside a Svelte component, to convert these into state, you don't have to do anything. Like you can just import from my store, and you can just do this. So this is stateful, like as you can see, like we have 0, and like this is a stateful variable. But to do the same thing, like let's say that you want to use a store on a JavaScript file, that is a much less ergonomic from scratch, like if you want to do it from scratch, because basically what you would do is you would create, so first thing first, you need to rename this to .svelte.js, which is already something annoying maybe to do. But also, like, let's say you should basically do let stateful store is equal to $state, and then you do something like store.subscribe and get the $store value, and then you would do something like stateful store is equal to store, and then you can basically keep the two in sync. So inside your code, you can, I don't know, console log stateful store and like use an effect or do whatever you want. Create a derived, like that's it. But I mean, like this is not really ergonomic. So Svelte actually ships with from store, which also has the added advantage that basically you can first thing first, like you can just pass a store, and it's easier. But it's also handling the cleanup for you, so it's much easier. So let's say that I export also this, and I can get stateful store, and if I do stateful store.current, I'm seeing the 0, and obviously now if I change and I do $store plus, like I'm changing the store, but I'm also getting information on these on the other side of the stateful. So now like the resubscription is handled better. Allow to pass in TS preference to migration, so that when we are migrating your code, the CLI is actually checking, do you have a TS config in your file, in your files? So if you have a TS config, you're probably using TypeScript, and so like we do stuff in a kind of a different way. Extend derived state validation error to indirect exports. So if you are exporting a derived or a state without actually enclosing it in a closure, we are warning you, and now it's also for indirect exports, which is cool. Inject CSS in prod mode. So if you are in prod mode and you are injecting CSS, I don't know if we can actually select this here. I guess we can do this, like Svelte options, CSS is equal to inject. Injected, maybe? Yeah. So now you have your CSS here, and it's been minified. I don't know if this is the case. Color, red. I guess in this case it can't really minify it. Let's say that I have a class is equal button cool. I want to see it in action. I don't know if it's actually working in the REPL. Sorry, I'm tired. I have 3 hours of sleep. So I guess like in this case, it's not minifying it, but I would say that just because, it's removing spaces, so it's actually minifying it in a certain way. I don't think they are doing more than enough, like more than needed, but it's minifying it a bit, so it's interesting. Ensure to-store subscription correctly sync latest value. This is again, to-store is kind of the opposite of from-store. So if you have some stateful variable that you want to use outside a Svelte component, you can use to-store to pass it to something else. This is something that I actually like been hit by. So if you're trying to test your components or maybe your utility libraries or stuff like that, if you try to test it, if you are in a JS DOM environment in vtest, it's perfectly fine. And you kinda... Sorry guys, I'm really tired, sorry. So before this PR, Svelte was accessing request animation frame in the browser build. But this meant that if you're trying to to test in vtest, you need to add the browser condition, because otherwise you are testing in Node. So vtest by default says, okay, I'm running in Node. Okay. I'm sorry, guys. I'm yawning so much, but I am tired. Basically, Svelte was accessing request animation frame even for files where JS DOM was not an environment. So JS DOM is actually providing a request animation frame mock. But if you are in a file where you don't need the JS DOM environment, since you added the browser export condition to vtest, it was still checking request animation frame, and obviously it was not there in Node, and so it was erroring out. Basically, like, this PR made sure that we are not accessing request animation frame on the module, but eagerly. So whenever you request animation frame, then we're accessing. Otherwise, no, and that's better. I'm sorry, guys. I swear it's not because of you. Ensure element effects are executed in the correct order. This is something that was like, it's actually introducing a new kind of effect, not for you, but for the Svelte runtime, because basically it's for those effects that are attached to elements, for example, an action or stuff like that. And this actually ensures that like the order inside the DOM is respected, which is pretty cool. And this, like we already talked about this, ensure child effects are destroyed before they're derived. This is also something like, in a specific case, like the bug that made us discover this was about like when you pass a prop and you are not using it, but you are using it on destroy. Sorry. It was actually being already destroyed, and so now child effects are destroyed before the derives of the child. Ensure custom element attribute prop changes are in their own context. So this is some custom element stuff, which, I mean, I know that there's been this discourse a lot, but it's very annoying to deal with. Wrap ID where not and has with global during the migration. This is something that it's like, if I have a has here, span, for example, and I try to migrate. Oh, gosh, sorry guys. Let's say that I try to migrate these from an old component. Oh, I actually probably need this. Sorry, name is equal to Paolo. Name, stateful current, blah, 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 blah. Now, if I had this, before, basically, before that, like, there was a fix in Svelte that made so that has, and let's actually have a span, like, I think I can have a div which has a span inside. Cool. So like this selector is now matching, but if you go and see the CSS output, oh, this is probably another bug on the playground. Let's try to refresh. So if you see the CSS output, now the has is also scoped. So the span is not just a random span below the tree. Like, it's actually a span that needs to be in this component. Sorry guys, I know it's pretty annoying to watch me yawn so much. This is now scoped, but this means that if you are moving this component from Svelte 4 to Svelte 5, this doesn't work anymore. So when you do the migration, we're actually adding a global so that it's actually the same as before. This may not be the best thing. Like if you are migrating your code, pay attention to this, because obviously if you were expecting that to be an actual, like if you were already working in Svelte 5 and you were expecting that to be an actual scoped selector, this could bite you, but yeah, pay attention to it. But in general, it's a pretty cool addition. Allow warning filter option for compile module, so you can filter the warning out. Ensure unmount correctly fires when new expressions are used. Ensure each block inert items are disposed of if each block is also inert. So inert is basically when an each block has some item that is not present anymore, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not 100% sure about this, so don't quote me on this. But yeah, ensure compile statements are correctly included. This was a small bug that was introduced fixing another bug before. And basically now, if you add a snippet inside, an element and you were using bind these, for example, there was nowhere near to be seen. So ensure transition are applied to nested element. This is also cool. So let's see if we have some SvelteKit release. Ensure element is focused after subsequent clicks on the same hash link. Okay. So probably elements were not focused after the same, if you navigate to the same point. Avoid preload if event default was prevented for touch start or mouse down events. This is like this kind of stuff that is so close, it's so edgy, so edge case. So fix, avoid reloading behavior for hash links with data SvelteKit reload if the hash is on the same page. So basically if you add some hash with data SvelteKit reload, if the hash is on the same page, you don't need to reload, you just need to navigate there. So nice thing that like we're getting, like always, even those nice things are better. So prefer TS in unclear migration situation if TS config is found in Svelte migrate. And enhanced image now requires Svelte 5, which is, so if you are using enhanced image and you upgrade to 0.4.0, and actually this was released 28 seconds ago, which is pretty cool. So yeah, I think we have the changelog down. So now for the scary part. So it's been Halloween, so don't be scared. But what I want to do is actually go over this. I don't look too much at this documentation because it can cause eye strain and stuff like that. I'm joking. But like again, as I've said, like this is a pretty cool article about use effect in React, and like use effect in React is pretty different from effect in Svelte in terms of foot guns. Like those two things are very different because like use effect, the biggest foot gun is that you have to specify your array of dependencies, and you don't need to do it in Svelte. It's all handled for you and it's very precise. That's also like the important bit, is that like even for example if you are accessing some variable inside a branch and you're not entering that branch, you don't have that dependency. So basically effect in Svelte is basically eliminating every foot gun that use effect has, but it's still an escape hatch. So if you find yourself using a lot of effects, you should think about it. And I think this article actually like shows a bunch of stuff that you might not need an effect for. So this is true for React, and we will see the same for Svelte. So like the most important bit is this, updating state based on props or state. So let's say that you have first name and last name. It might be tempting to have another state for full name and then use an effect to like match the two together. You can do this in Svelte, obviously, but the right thing to do here is use derived state. So in React, which is like rerunning this code over and over again, you can just do const full name is equal to this. In Svelte, you actually have to use derived, but you also get a lot of more benefits from using derived. So let's actually take a look at this very simple example. Let's say that you have name Paolo, last name Ricciuti, and let's say that you want to have a full name. What you can do is you can do const full name is equal $sign derived name plus last name. And if you do full name, you get your derived state. And this will be kept in sync. So if I have an input, for example, and I bind value to name, for example, if I change this, obviously the full name is also changing. So this is basically the same thing as writing this in React, and you should do this. Like if you have any kind of derived state, like if you find yourself reassigning state inside use effect, generally you want to have a derived for it. It might not always be possible sometimes, but generally, especially if you are not writing to the derived, if you have derived state, use a derived, never use an effect. This is caching expensive calculation. Like this is something that you don't have to care about in Svelte. Like in React, you need to use memo because this code is run over and over again. Every time any state changes in React, this code is run again. And so use memo is actually making sure that if any of those dependencies changes, like this code does not rerun, basically. But in Svelte, you don't need to do that. You can just use derived, and derived already is super performant in the sense that If any of those change, it will not rerun, it will just return the same value as before. And even like if you have a chain of derived, you can also like be assured that if the value of one of the derived does not change, the rest of the chain will not rerun, which is super cool and it's very superpower. So yeah, that's another thing. Resetting all state when a prop change. So like, let's say that in this case, you're getting a user ID and you have a comment, and whenever the user ID changes, you want to rerun, like you want to reset the state basically. So there, like the suggestion in the React documentation is instead of using an effect, you can just abstract these in a separate component and use the key attribute in Svelte that will in React. That means that every time that this changes, React will treat these as a different component. You can actually do the same in React, in Svelte. Sorry, I'm confusing two. So let's say that you want to have, you have a user ID of 1, of 0, and you want to have something like button on click is equal to user ID plus plus, button change user ID like this. And if you have some state that you want to reset whenever user ID changes, you can basically use the same thing. So instead of having like your comment and use an effect, let comment is equal $state like this, and you could do this effect and do user ID just to track the dependency, and then do comment is equal to this. And if you do this and you I don't know, do input bind value comment like this, basically whenever you do this and you change the user ID, now it's resetting. But again, this is using an effect, and it's much more cumbersome than just using an input user ID component. You can move your state there. You don't have to use an effect, so you can just remove this and just do this, bind value comment, and then you can use import input from input user ID, and then I can do this, input like this. And I can just wrap it with a key user ID this time. So instead of passing as a key, you can wrap it inside this, and this will basically have the same result without using an effect. So we have a question. What if I don't have a return value but just a function to run? Effect makes more sense to me since there are no values depending each other. Would you recommend Derived still over effect? Yeah, I mean, if you just need to run a function, we will actually get to this in a bit. So by the way, I can also remove the state here so that I don't have an effect. Just to show you that it's actually working anyway. So if you just need to call a function, obviously no, it doesn't make sense to have a derived, because derived is for derived state. And we will actually get to this in a bit in one of those things, and I will talk a bit more there when how to do it. So this is adjusting some state when a prop change, which is basically the same thing. It's not really the same thing. I mean, they're doing this inside the thing itself, but a better suggestion in my opinion at least, is a better opinion is doing this. Like, it's sharing logic between event handlers, and this is where you want to like, it's also answering kind of your question. Like, let's say that you want to adjust the information when adjust some state when some other state changes. The point is, if you are changing the state, then just do it when you change the state. If you are not changing the state, that's one probably of the few reasons where you want to use an effect. But also, like, if the state is owned by this component, when you expose that component, so let's actually make an example. Let's say that I have this user ID here, and this I'm passing some state to this component. So let's say that I have a props here. So comment now is a prop, which is a bindable, and is equal to $sign props, right? So in this case, I have my state on top. So let comment like this, and I want to bind comment. So now I am not changing the state myself. So because if you are changing the state, you should just use like change. Like, let's say that I want to do the opposite. Right now, whenever a comment changes, I want to update user ID. I want to increase user ID. So I can show user ID and I can show comment, right? So, and what I want to do is, whenever comment changes, I want to increase user ID. So I can do $effect, and I can say comment just to track the dependency. And I can say untrack, because be aware of reading and writing from the same. So I can do untrack from Svelte itself. And I can do untrack because I don't want to register a dependency on count, on user ID, and I can do user ID ++, right? So now, whenever this changes, user ID changes. And by the way, like, I am because I'm still using the key here. So so let's say that I do this. Whenever I change this, I'm updating user ID. Now, this effect may seem to be needed because like, I am not the one changing user ID, because if you are the one changing user ID, so we don't need these, and we want these comment and on input, for example. So we can do value is equal to this, and we can do on input like this. And then instead of binding, I can do comment, and I can do on input. And I can do comment is equal to e.target.value. Should be current target, but it's fine. So if instead of binding, I have this situation like this, not this works anyway, but in this case, I am the one in charge of updating comment. And if I can do this, I can also do this inside the event listener. So instead of using an effect, it's much easier and much more reliable to reason about just changing the value when you change the state. And so like this. But let's say that you have a bind value, so you can't actually change, like you don't have the on input, and maybe this component is passing your state something else. What you can do is you can actually like sorry, I can speak. So you can actually make sure that, and that's why, for example, like Svelte will warn you if you change, if you mutate a state deep down that is not owned by you, because it's much better to have this kind of mutation to always happen in the component that also have the state. So what you can do is you can actually kind of force this. So let's say that like you could have let like comment value, for example, and this can have a get comment where you return comment and a set comment. So those are getters and setters. So value, and I want to do comment is equal to value. So if you have something like this and you pass down, like you can bind comment, bind comment is equal comment value dot comment. And by doing this, if I can write, by doing this, you are actually back in the same situation as before, where you actually have access to the scope where you can update user ID++. So obviously I need to go back and I need to do this $bindable, and I need to actually bind value here to get back to this situation. So now everything should work, and if I change without an effect, I have the same situation basically. So that's the kind of stuff that you should, like, you may say like it's easier to reason about this for an effect, but it's actually not true, because here basically whenever you are updating comment, you are also doing all the extra work to that you need to do inside an effect. And like another example that they are doing this is sharing logic between event handlers. So let's say that you have this product is in cart and you want to show a notification because multiple handler can add to cart, right? So instead of writing this logic on every add to cart, and then you need to also show the notification, like you may think, okay, I want to use an effect, and whenever the product is in cart, then I will show the notification. But even then, like, to abstract this, you don't need an effect. You just need a function. So you can just add the show notification inside a single function, and instead of calling add to cart, you just call by product. And obviously, like, this is just JavaScript, so it's the same in Svelte too. Yeah, I mean, this is like, for example, sending a post request when like this is more of a yeah, like this is making an example. Like if you want to use, like if you want to send a post request, this could be like, can be a good valid, like a good thing, because you are sending an event, an analytics event, and basically you want to have an event when the component renders. So this is decent. Like you can probably use something like this even in Svelte. Let's say that you want to have your validation, you could do something like $effect, and inside here you can do like send analytics, something like this, because basically what you want with this effect, what you are signaling with this effect is, I want to send analytics when I mount this component. So this is fine. If you need to do something like this, like when JSON to submit is this, then send a post request, again, it's just a function. Like you can do this inside your handle submit. So whenever you can, I made a tweet last day, because I said that effect should have been an event handler. And it's true, like most of the time, you don't want an effect. You want to write that logic in a function and call that function from within an event handler. So keep in mind that when you're writing your effects in Svelte. This is also chain of computation, like is the same. It's even worse for React, because React is just setting state and rerunning the stuff all over again. Like in theory, this could be a bit better in Svelte, but still, this is just a series of derived that you can just do. And as I was saying before, if I have a series of derived, the best part is that Svelte will actually stop the chain if one of the value does not change. I want to actually show you this because I think this is really interesting. So let's say that I have this. Let me remove all of these. I have this user ID and I'm changing the user ID. And now let's say that I do, I don't know, I want to have, yeah, okay, let's say that I have is odd, which is derived state. And let's use a derived.by so that we can pass a function in and log something when something happens. So I want to console log is odd. And I want to return user ID %2 is equal to 0. Yeah, it's equal to 1, actually. So I want this to be is odd, basically. And so if I have this printed out is odd, obviously this will swap between true and false, right? But let's say that now I have plus equal 2. This will stay false forever. But obviously, if you see, like is odd needs to run again, because if the user ID changes, like this function has no idea that the user ID is still odd. But what is happening is, let's say that I have another derived state, like is odd sentence is equal to $derived.by, and we can do console log is odd sentence. And if we do something like this and we return is odd, then odd, otherwise even. Let's say that we have something like this, and now we do is odd sentence. And let's actually do is odd and is odd sentence. So when we do something like this, obviously, initially, if we refresh the page, initially we get is odd and is odd sentence, right? So we run both of those functions. But now when I change the user ID changes, and this causes this derived to rerun. But since this doesn't change, this is never run again. So if I do this, like I'm running this function every time, but this function is never to be called again, which is pretty cool. So let's see. So I don't get the appeal of not using effect when I have to make so many adjustments in my code just to do the same. So the appeal of not using effect is that the code that you write when you are not using effect is much cleaner, because it's much easier to reason about. And obviously, like, you have to make the change to your code only if you already wrote your code full of effect. So if you by default write your code without using effect, you don't have to rewrite your code. You just have to write your code in a different way of thinking. And the reason because it's easier is because, like, look at the indirection of this code. So I am handling the submit of the form, And inside the form, I am setting the JSON. And then inside an effect, I am launching, like I'm using the post request to send that JSON. Like there are 2 layers of indirection. So if a new person comes in, or even you in 6 months needs to read this code, you have to jump from the form to the handle, and then you have to see set JSON submit, and then you have to say, okay, set JSON submit, does this trigger some effect? So you have to go to search all the effect where that is handled. And so like it's much more difficult to reason about these things, while in reality, I don't know if, yeah, okay, I think I have some problem with streaming, but I think now it should be good. So it's an extra layer of indirection, and the easiest thing to do is just move this code inside this event handler. Same thing for above, like you want to reuse the same logic in multiple event handlers, just put that code in another function. So I think the code, if you follow these suggestions, is much more easier to read and reason about, which is the important bit, because we spend way more time reading code than actually using code. Let's see the other question. When we use SvelteKit, the page data is running as a prop. Is there a better way to sync the data if we have a state that are created from the data without effect? So if you want to sync the data, what does it mean to sync the data? If you need derived state, just use derived. If you need to take that data and store it inside another variable that then you can change, then you might need an effect. That's one of the rare cases when you might need an effect for that. So yeah, like there are some other ways around probably, but that's one probably of the few cases where you want to have an effect. But also, writing to a prop that can change is something that you rarely want, because like you want to write to that prop, and you also want that when that prop is changed, you want to lose your what you did. So there are some situations where this might be useful, but they are rare. So if you need such situation, please use an effect. It depends. I think it's more difficult to have to remember to put a function call in all the places than that some state is changed. Again, it really depends. And I mean, it's also up to preference. This, like like what you are saying is that I want to write my code once and have it handled the multiple situation, right? So I don't want to write that, like, so if you take a look at this example here, so here I have this byproduct that I have to write in every handle that is changing product to also include the notification, right? So in reality, I would argue that you're not really adding a new function to every call, because you still need the add to cart function, right? You are just changing where that function is. Like, so you're saying instead of writing add to cart product, I'm writing add to cart and show notification. I'm writing all of that in a function, so now I can just call by product instead of add to cart. And if you want, I mean, you can even rename add to cart and call this function add to cart, so you don't even have to change your code if you want. But what I'm getting at is that once you write your code like this, like you are just writing your code with this function already. So you don't have to remember to add this function whenever it changes. And the best part is that, let's say that you want to add to the cart, but there are some specific situation where you don't want a notification. in that case, you have to remember to go to the effect and add a special case into the effect, because you don't want to show the notification if when you are adding to the cart, the product is, I don't know, on sale, for example. Then you start to have an effect which is really complex, because you want to do like if it's on sale, then don't show the notification. Then if it's on sale, then show the notification with this different text and stuff like that. While in reality, you can just have a function, and if you don't want the notification, you just add to cart directly. So let's go ahead. Like this is initializing the application. So for example, use effect to load data from local storage or checkout token. I mean, this is kind of specific to React in the sense that you can just write the same thing outside of app. You can do the same thing in SvelteKit in the hooks client store. But like there are ways obviously to initialize your application in SvelteKit too. So but I would also argue that this is probably a fine thing to do. Like if you are on mount in the root layout and you do on mount, or you do $sign effect without a dependency, I would argue that this is probably also fine. So Pepkin is still saying, not really. I mean, I get it that in this example it's better to have named function that do something. Here is completely understandable to do it here. So yes, but the point, like what this article is all about, is that you shouldn't rewrite your code to adhere to this. Like if you enter into the mindset that effect is an escape hatch, you will find yourself writing your code in a more structured way and a more organized way so that you don't need an effect. And that will lead automatically to write code that maybe you need to write a bit more code, but it will be much easier to debug in the future. So that's why I am suggesting you this. Like that's why I am going over the React documentation in this week in Svelte, because I think this is a really important point. Like effect should be considered an escape hatch. Like we have to have it because there are some situations where we need it. As I was explaining, some situation can happen when you need $sign effect. But most of the time, you will more than likely have a way to do it without using effect, which will lead, when you will read that code in 6 months, to a much better experience. I mean, you can run this, notifying a parent component about state changes. Again, like this is something that you should just do in your effect. So in your event listener. So let's say that you want the on change to like you want to notify the parent on change when is on changes. What you should do is just move these to the handle click, for example. So update toggle, for example. So instead you can just wrap it inside a single function and also do the on change there. And as you can see, like again, I'm stressing this very much. Like obviously this is showing a bad code and how you can refactor it, but the lesson here, you should never write code like this. You should directly write code like this, and it's absolutely doable. Like the moment you know about this stuff, and that's why I'm showing you this, it's absolutely doable to just write your code like this, and it will lead to a much better experience. Passing data to the parent is the same thing. Like if you can, you should probably just have the data in the parent and pass it down to the children if you want. Subscribing to an external store. I mean, I think like they are using a specific API from React. I think this is one of the cases where you probably want to use an effect in Svelte, and it's fine. Like, I think it's a good thing. Like, obviously, actually, you don't even need an effect here because Svelte actually provides you with Svelte window. So that's another important bit. Effects are basically, effects are a way to synchronize your state with a synchronous non-stateful variable API in the browser. So that's where you want an effect. So for example, like inside Svelte, if you take a look at this, like, template effect, you see? So Svelte itself is using an effect. So am I lying to you and you should always use an effect? No, and that's the reason. So Svelte, it's using an effect because this is where it makes sense to use an effect. Because what they need to do is take your isOdd variable and synchronize that variable with an API which is not reactive, like the setText API. Like if you do text.text content, that thing in the browser is not reactive. So that's when you need an effect. If you need to synchronize your state with some external API that is not reactive. So basically it's registering event listener, some stuff that like is not controllable by Svelte. So let's say that tomorrow Svelte comes and say, okay, now you can't use onClick on elements anymore. You need to add it manually. Then it makes sense to use an effect, because if you want to register an event listener on a button, you should do it when the state changes, for example. If you want to, I don't know, set the Svelte comes in and say, okay, from tomorrow, you can't actually write anything inside a button. You need to do it by yourself. You basically want to do what Svelte is doing here and get the button element, update an effect, and use, like, set the text inside that effect to user ID, for example, inside an effect. So this is where an effect is useful, is when you want to go from a reactive state inside Svelte to some external API which is not reactive. And this all sprouted because in the React documentation, they tell you, okay, you should do all of these to update when it's online, when it's not online. In Svelte, you can just do Svelte window on online like this, and Svelte will take care of registering the event listener and deregistering the event listener when you close the page. So when this component is unmounted. So this is one of the, this is why Svelte is cooler. By the way, all this code and this tiny bit of code in Svelte. But we are not here to compare. Or are we? Fetching data, again, this is probably something like, if you want to fetch data, you should probably use the load function from SvelteKit, if you can, because that will give you a bunch of advantages. It will automatically invalidate when you navigate away, when you it will load the data concurrently to the rendering of the page, so you are not rendering and then fetching, you are just rendering and fetching at the same time. So if you can, just use SvelteKit and load function. If you can't, that's probably a good place to use an effect inside your components. because you want to synchronize with the fetch API basically, which is not reactive. But obviously you should make sure that you do your duty, because like you don't want to set some state after an effect has run and stuff like that. So you should do your duty. Or by the way, you could also check like one library that I presented last yesterday actually, no, Wednesday, on Svelte London Meetup on this channel. You can check it out. So I think that's it. So yeah, here's some challenges. Let's close the React documentation and never open it again. But this was a fun stream, and I guess like it was also, I hope that it was useful for you. Let me see another question, which is, Svelte is probably using effects to update the canvas, right? Probably. I can ask because like one of like Svelte, the Svelte creator is also one Svelte ambassador, but probably yes, because again, the Canvas API is a perfect example of this, because the Canvas API is not reactive, and you want to synchronize it between the two, and you can't do it like declaratively in Svelte. So in that case, it probably makes sense to have an effect so that you can synchronize whenever a prop changes, you can rerun the function to like to change the triangle, for example. But even then, for example, if you are in full control of the state and you just expose, I don't know, a getter or a setter for that, you might be able to run that without an effect. It really depends. So it depends on how far your state spread. So if your state, you have a single state in a component, and this component is being updated by a multitude of components, a multitude of users, and you don't have a way to have a setter on it, then it's probably fine to use an effect. But again, like the important bit is whenever you try to think, okay, should I use an effect? You should probably ask yourself, okay, I want a derived state. If the answer is yes, then you want to use derived. The other question that you might answer is, do I am doing this to synchronize some state to some other state? Then you probably want an event listener. So, and then you can ask yourself, do I have a way to like run this code where the state is set instead of using an effect? Then you can probably do that. After that, you can probably use an effect. Like, it's not the end of the world. But when you run your code, when you build your code, try to think about, okay, I want to do it without effect. Whenever you see effect, something should tingle in your ear and say, let's see if there's another way. So I think that's it. I hope you enjoyed this week in Svelte. I hope it went well, because I mean, it seems like it went decently. I probably had some hiccup here and there, but I hope that it was not that big of an hiccup. And I'll see you guys next week.